On a fog-shrouded island off the Pacific coast, a weary veteran sought quiet after years of running from memories. But the German shepherd he inherited, Bran, sensed differently. One dawn, as the wind howled against the lighthouse walls, Bran began scraping urgently at a steel panel in the control room floor. Corin brushed it off as nerves until the dog's frantic insistence revealed a hidden chamber his grandfather had buried beneath the island. Why would a man spend his life hiding a system no one knew existed? And how could a loyal dog detect a threat long before trained eyes could see it? What Corin uncovered below the lighthouse would rewrite his purpose forever. If this story touches your heart, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. A thin curtain of Pacific rain blurred the late afternoon skyline of Seattle, softening the angles of its towers into trembling silhouettes against a pewter skin. Inside the narrow brick building of Marrow and Finch Attorneys, Corin Hale sat rigidly at the edge of a leather chair, the old smell of dust, paper, and lemon polish stirring memories he had spent years trying to bury. Corin, in his mid-30s, carried a presence shaped by years as a para-rescue specialist. Tall, wiry, with a frame built more for endurance than strength, his shoulders slightly drawn inward as though forever bracing for an unseen impact. His sharp-cut jaw was shadowed by stubble grown more from forgetting than intention, and his ash-gray eyes carried a numb alertness, the look of someone trained to scan windows, corners, movements, even when he wished he didn't care. His skin, lightly weathered by desert winds and mountain rescues, bore faint scars along his forearms from missions that had cost him friends and more sleep than he would ever recover. Yet beneath the quiet tension was a gentleness learned from tending to the injured and the terrified. A gentleness he now feared he no longer deserved. Across the desk sat Attorney Silas Marrow, a thin man in his late 60s whose entire posture resembled an exclamation point bent by time. His face, drawn and angular, bore deep creases that spoke of decades managing feuds, failed estates, and the quiet griefs families hid behind formal signatures. His wispy silver hair fell neatly around his temples, and his steel-framed glasses clung precariously to a narrow nose. Though his voice was mild, his eyes were sharp, eyes that missed nothing and forgave even less. He regarded Corin with a professional mixture of sympathy and distance, as though sensing the man's frayed edges but refusing to touch them. The room's third occupant, slouched with careless entitlement, was Merritt Sloan, Corin's younger cousin by 4 years, though at first glance Merritt looked older in all the wrong ways. He was short and heavy-set, his soft jawline lost beneath a layer of comfortable indulgence. His once fashionable haircut was overlong and gelled with a desperation that didn't fit his round, smug face, and his expensive charcoal suit strained where it should have draped. Privilege clung to him like an ill-fitting coat. He had never lacked anything except perhaps humility. A faint cologne cloud, something citrusy and too eager, radiated around him as he tapped his loafer impatiently against the floor. He smirked at Corin with the confident cruelty of someone convinced he had already won. Silas cleared his throat with a papery rasp and opened the final envelope of Alden Hale's will. The name hung between them like dust shaken from a long-sealed box. Alden, Corin's grandfather, had been a rugged, solitary man with wind-creased skin, a thick beard the color of driftwood, and hands so calloused they felt like carved oak. To most people, he appeared difficult, distant, even harsh, but Corin remembered the rare, quiet moments of warmth. Alden teaching him how to read a compass, how to listen to foghorns and waves, how to tell weather by the taste of the wind. Those memories, softened by time, still held a faint ache. He had cut ties with the family long ago after stepping down from a classified coastal defense project, retreating to an isolated lighthouse island along the Oregon coast. Corin had not seen him in 12 years. Silas began reading the list of assets: warehouses in Tacoma, Apartment complexes, stocks, transport contracts, dock leases, each one delivered calmly to Merritt, who leaned back, smugness spreading like oil across water. Corin sat unmoving, as he had trained himself to do when waiting for helicopters to descend or for explosions to stop. Then Silas paused. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly as he read the next line. "To my grandson, Corin Hale," he said, ignoring Merritt's soft, derisive snort, "I leave Wraithlight Isle and all structures upon it, along with the care of my companion, Bran." Merritt laughed outright, a sharp, braying sound that echoed in the dim room. "The island, the lighthouse, and a dog, that's it? He gets a pet and a pile of rocks?" Silas held up a hand for silence, then continued reading a final handwritten note from Alden. His voice lowered slightly, as though the message carried weight not meant for public air. "I leave this to Corin because he understands what it means to keep a silent watch." The phrase struck Corin with unexpected force, cutting cleanly through the numbness that had cocooned him for months. Silent watch. He had once kept watches on mountaintops, in burning valleys, at the thresholds of disaster. Watches that cost him men he couldn't save. A flicker, part grief, part recognition, moved across his eyes. Merritt scoffed, but his expression contained a spark of something else. Suspicion. A man like Merritt believed no one left behind something worthless, unless something valuable was hidden beneath it. He leaned forward, lips curling. Old Alden finally lost his mind. Unless... His voice dropped into a hiss of greed. Unless he hid something out there. Corin said nothing. He felt something stir beneath the years of weight, a pull, faint but real, toward the lonely island where a man he barely knew had trusted him with something no one else in the family deserved. Silas closed the folder gently. "Your grandfather was deliberate, not sentimental," he said, folding his hands. "If he left you Wraithlight Isle, Mr. Hale, it was for a reason." Corin exhaled slowly, rain tapping the windows like distant footsteps. He did not know what waited for him on that island. A burden, a secret, or simply a place where ghosts learn to quiet themselves. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt something like direction. And he knew he had to go. A low veil of moving fog clung to the Oregon coastline as Corin Hale guided his battered pickup along the serpentine road that wound between cliffs and pines, the world narrowing to a pale gray corridor lit only by shifting headlights. The farther he drove, the more it felt as though the city and the noise inside his skull was dissolving behind him. When the road finally opened into the tiny harbor town of Crescent Ford, dusk had already blurred the fishing boats into silhouettes, bobbing like tired shoulders in the tide. The air smelled of brine, old rope, and the cold metallic scent of an imminent storm. Corin parked near the pier and stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into wet timber darkened by years of rain and salt spray. Waiting beneath the weak glow of a hanging bulb was Rufus Pike, a man who looked as if he had been carved straight out of driftwood. In his early 70s, Rufus stood with his back bent slightly from decades bent over nets and engines, his shoulders squared with stubborn pride. Deep-set wrinkles framed a face tanned by ruthless coastal weather, and his beard, thick, bristled, and more white than gray, gave him an almost mythic presence. His eyes, a pale, stormy blue, flicked over Corin with the cool discernment of someone who had spent a lifetime reading danger in tides and men alike. His knitted cap pulled low, his heavy wool sweater stained with grease and sea salt, Rufus radiated both irritation and integrity. "You Alden's boy?" he said, voice deep and gravelly, as though dragged across stones. Corin nodded. "Grandson." Rufus grunted, half acceptance, half test, then jerked a thumb toward the end of the pier. "Boat's ready, and the dog's been waitin'." The boat, a small, weather-beaten vessel painted a faded sea green, rocked gently in the tide. And there, standing tall at the stern, was Bran, Now that Corin saw him in person, the dog's presence hit him like a sudden gust. Bran was large even for a German shepherd, 5 years old, with a thick coat of smoky gray mixed with white streaks along his chest and tail, giving him the cold, majestic look of a creature carved from winter. His posture was still and disciplined, paws planted firmly as though guarding a doorway. His amber eyes were alert yet steady, eyes that assessed, not feared. Corin approached slowly, aware of the weight of the moment. Bran did not bark, growl, or retreat. Instead, he tilted his head, analyzing the man who now stepped into the role Alden had left behind. Corin crouched, lowering himself until he was closer to the dog's eye level. The fog curled around them like a living thing. After a long heartbeat, Bran leaned forward, touched his cold nose gently against Corin's palm, and then sat, a silent acceptance, the kind warriors gave each other before long marches. Rufus snorted approvingly. "Dog don't warm up to many. Guess he's taken to you." The boat ride to Wraithlight Isle was a test of resolve itself. The ocean heaved and rolled in long, heavy breaths, each swell lifting Corin's stomach and dropping it again. Bran stood with quiet stability, paws braced, gaze fixed forward as though memorizing the sea's rhythm. Corin felt a strange calm watching him, an anchor he didn't realize he needed. When the dark hump of the island appeared in the fog, it rose like the curved spine of some ancient sea creature. Jagged cliffs ringed its base, and atop them stood the white lighthouse, its paint peeled into long scars, its black lantern room staring out like a blind eye refusing to close. Once ashore, Corin climbed the narrow path carved into the rock, Bran trotting ahead with confident, silent steps. The air was colder up here, the wind slicing in sharp diagonal bursts that rattled the rusted railing. The nearby control house, once white, now stained with rust and moss, waited like an abandoned outpost. Corin paused at the entrance, the weight of solitude pressing against him. The hollow echo of waves exploding against the island's base reminded him too much of helicopter blades and collapsing buildings, and a familiar hitch of breath threatened to work its way up his throat. But Bran brushed his head lightly against Corin's leg as he passed inside, an unspoken grounding that drew him back to the present. The first week unfolded in a grueling rhythm that stitched the man and the island into one uneasy coexistence. The fog at dawn swallowed the horizon whole, the mornings filled with the creak of warped floorboards and the howl of wind forcing itself through cracks in the lighthouse windows. Corin patched the roof tiles with cold, numbed hands, replaced broken panes, and wrestled with a generator so old its casing was nearly fossilized. Bran followed him everywhere, scanning corners, shadows, and cliffs, with the instinct of a soldier on patrol. Corin's mind, bruised by years of hypervigilance, found strange comfort in the dog's silent companionship. When old memories flashed, blood on sand, the stutter of gunfire, the moment a teammate's hand slipped from his, Bran would nudge him gently or press against his side until his breathing steadied. The island was unforgiving, yet it asked nothing of him except presence, repair, and watchfulness. And watchfulness was the only thing Corin had ever mastered without failing. It was on the 7th day, while exploring a small workroom behind the lighthouse, that Corin discovered the notebooks. The room smelled of mildew and engine oil, its shelves sagging with rusted tools and glass jars clouded with dust. Behind a stack of weather-beaten charts, he found a metal box. Inside were Alden's notebooks, thick, leather-bound, stained at the edges but perfectly legible. He opened the first one. Schematic drawings, coastal radar diagrams, tide charts annotated with obsessive detail, lists of unidentified vessel signatures, notes on low-frequency vibrations, and paragraphs describing the ocean as though it were a language only he could hear. Corin felt a chill travel down his spine. This was no hobby. Alden had been mapping patterns that should have belonged to classified naval files, not the private journals of an old man living alone on a rock. He read the final line on the first page. The sea speaks. Most refuse to listen, but some of us must. Bran, lying on the floor beside him, lifted his head as if he too recognized something in the words. Corin closed the notebook slowly. The island was no ordinary inheritance, and his place on it was no accident. A silent watch indeed, one that had been kept alone for far too long, and now it was his turn. The night settled over Wraithlight Isle like a thick wool blanket, heavy and unmoving, the kind of early spring darkness that pressed itself against the windows and whispered of storms that never fully arrived. Inside the lighthouse control room, the wood stove glowed a steady orange, its warmth cutting through the damp chill that lived permanently in the walls. Corin Hale sat on a low stool beside it, the leather-bound notebooks of Alden Hale open across his lap, their pages filled with diagrams, coded markings, and the quiet obsessions of a man who had spent decades listening to the sea. The fire cast shifting gold across Corin's narrow, scar-lined face, softening the hard angles carved by years of rescue missions and the weight of memories he still couldn't name without flinching. Bran lay stretched out before the stove, the big German shepherd's smoky gray and white coat shimmering in the firelight. He had dozed lightly for the past hour, paws twitching faintly in dreams only working dogs understood. Dreams of patterns, scents, warnings, memories of a different handler now gone. His amber eyes suddenly snapped open, pupils dilating as though catching a sound too low for human ears. In one fluid motion he rose, ears pointed and stiff, gaze fixed toward the far left corner of the room. Corin looked up, confused. "What is it, Bran?" he murmured, expecting a gull landing on the roof or a stray piece of metal rattling in the wind. But Bran didn't move toward the door or windows. He stepped slowly toward a section of steel flooring near the base of the lighthouse tower, each paw placed with the careful precision of a dog trained for dangerous ground. Corin set the notebook aside and watched, a frown pulling at his brow. Bran sniffed the metal seam intensely, head shifting left and right, hackles rising, not in aggression, but in recognition. Then the dog lifted one paw and raked it sharply across the metal plate. The sound was shrill, metallic, unmistakable. Corin winced. "Hey, easy," he said, out of instinct. The irritation clipped but soft. Yet the moment the words left his mouth, Bran went still, ears folding back for half a heartbeat, before he looked up, eyes locking with Corin's in something almost human. A plea, a warning, a command. Corin's chest tightened. He knew that look. He had trusted such looks in deserts, jungles, ruined cities. Dogs didn't scratch metal without cause, not dogs like Bran. He moved closer, kneeling beside the plate. The steel was old, thick, cold despite the fire's warmth. When he pressed along its edge, something gave, a hairline seam, thin as a knife slice, hidden by grime and time. "What the hell did he build here?" Corin muttered. He stood, grabbed a rusted pry bar from the tool bench, wedged it into the seam, and leaned in with his full weight. The floor groaned like a waking creature. Then, with a deep metallic sigh, the panel lifted upward on unseen hinges, revealing a square shaft descending into darkness. A spiral staircase, steel, narrow, reinforced, twisted into the rock below. A cold breath rose from the opening, untouched by years, smelling faintly of metal, oil, and something older still. Bran peered down, tail held low but steady, a soldier's posture before entering unknown territory. Corin swallowed once, then stepped onto the top stair, the steel vibrating slightly beneath him. Down they went, spiraling deeper with each step, firelight shrinking until only the dim flashlight in Corin's hand illuminated their descent. At the bottom stood a thick naval-style door, built from layers of reinforced steel, a relic of military engineering. Corin hesitated, tracing the chipped paint with his fingers. His flashlight beam caught a faded stencil on the surface, one he recognized from his pararescue days. It meant secure compartment, it also meant purpose. He spun the wheel. The door opened with a muted hiss. Bran slipped in beside him. The chamber beyond was vast, far larger than the foundation of the lighthouse should have allowed. Lights flickered automatically, revealing a circular room carved directly into the rock, its walls lined with servers, conduit, and acoustic consoles. A massive curved screen dominated the far wall, dark but dormant, waiting. Corin exhaled slowly, awe and disbelief tangling in his chest. Corin Hale had turned this island into something extraordinary, something secret, something powerful. Bran padded forward, nose twitching as he examined the floor and walls, moving with the familiarity of a dog who had been down here before, memorizing the scents of machines and the lingering traces of the old man who had built them. Corin approached the central console. A small metal plaque rested at its base, polished despite the dust around it. He picked it up. Alden's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, deliberate letters etched with the certainty of a man who expected eventually to be understood. Do not use it to profit. Use it to protect. The watch is now yours. Corin closed his eyes for a moment, a wave of emotion rising unexpectedly. This man, distant, gruff, often absent, had trusted him with something immense, not for war, not for power, but for guardianship, for listening. He opened his eyes again, scanning the room. There were small details everywhere, a mug left on a side table, a worn jacket hanging on a hook, a box of old radio components half sorted. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, waiting for him. Bran nudged Corin's leg gently, sensing the shift in his breath. Corin rested a hand on the dog's thick fur. He trained you for this too, didn't he? He whispered. Bran's tail thumped once, solid and grounding. Corin turned back to the console and slid the notebook he carried into a narrow groove designed for it. The machinery hummed faintly in response, like a sleeping giant recognizing an old friend. He didn't activate anything yet, not until he understood it fully, but a truth settled deep in his bones, a truth he had been running from since leaving the pararescue teams behind. This place wasn't a burden. It was a call, and he was done running. The morning began in a muted half-light, the horizon wrapped in thin clouds that seemed harmless enough, the type of coastal gray that had become the daily backdrop of Wraithlight Isle. Corin Hale stood outside the lighthouse, his weathered boots planted firmly on the damp concrete platform, the air smelling of salt and cold iron. He had slept little after discovering the underground chamber, his mind alive with questions, responsibilities, and an uneasy sense that the island had only begun revealing its secrets. Bran, the large gray and white German shepherd with amber eyes and the silent discipline of a seasoned sentry, patrolled the perimeter with calm focus, pausing now and then to sniff the wind as though reading messages written in sea mist. It was Bran who heard the intruders first. His head snapped up, ears forward, body freezing in a tense line. Corin followed the dog's gaze toward the water. Out beyond the rocky inlet, a sleek white yacht cut through the waves, its glossy hull glaringly out of place against the rugged coastline. As it drew closer, Corin recognized the man standing on the bow. Merritt Sloane, his heavy-set frame braced awkwardly against the wind, his round face wearing both arrogance and queasy discomfort. His overpriced navy blazer whipped against him like a flag protesting its own existence. Two other men stood behind him, both unfamiliar, both armed with the posture of men paid well to be dangerous. The first was tall and wiry, with narrow shoulders and jittery energy, his face sharp and fox-like. His hair, sandy blonde and cropped short, was damp with spray, and his pale, quick-moving eyes carried the twitchy paranoia of someone who had run from too many bad deals. His name, Corin would soon learn, was Silas Kendrew, a small-time enforcer whose reputation in Portland's docks was a trail of broken promises and broken noses. The second was an entirely different beast. He stood a full head taller than the others, shoulders thick as mooring posts, his beard a dark, unkempt mass covering a jaw shaped like a granite boulder. A scar ran from his right ear to the corner of his mouth, giving his stern expression a permanent twist of menace. His name was Gage Lauren, a man whose resume featured more underground fight rings than legitimate employment. His deep-set brown eyes held no impatience, only a cold readiness, as though violence was his first language and the rest merely translation. The yacht anchored clumsily, and Merritt, clutching a briefcase, stepped onto a small dinghy with his hired muscle. As they motored toward the landing slab, Corin felt Bran drift closer, the dog's growl rumbling low, a gravitational pull of loyalty and warning. When Merritt finally climbed onto the island, wind catching his thinning hair, he forced a grin. "Corin, beautiful place you've got here," he shouted over the surf. "A bit rustic, but valuable, very valuable." Corin didn't move. His stance was calm but firm, broad shoulders squared beneath his worn jacket, his gray eyes flat with the patience of someone assessing a threat rather than greeting a relative. "What do you want, Merritt?" Merritt spread his arms in a performance of casual charm. "Simple. Granddad's little side project, whatever he built here, belongs to the family, meaning me. So let's not drag this out. You show me the system, I sell it to the buyers who actually understand its worth, and we both walk away richer." Corin didn't answer. Bran stepped between them, tail stiff, ears high, a silent wall of muscle and instinct. Silas Kendrew flinched. Gage Lauren didn't. He merely smirked, eyes narrowing with the cold eagerness of a man who enjoyed challenges. But before a single threat could be spoken, the wind changed. It rose, not gradually, but violently, as though something massive had exhaled across the ocean. The clouds thickened, folding into each other, darkening to bruised purple. A sudden blast of wind slammed against the lighthouse windows with the force of thrown stones. Corin looked west. "Atmospheric river," he murmured. A wall of rain was sweeping across the water like a moving continent. He felt the pressure shift deep in his bones. So did Bran. The dog's growl cut off abruptly. His head snapped upward, and then Bran howled. It was a long, high, keening sound that seemed to vibrate the very bolts of the lighthouse. It was not fear, it was signal. Corin had read Alden's notes enough to know that Bran had been trained for this. The dog sensed structural pressure in the lighthouse's foundation, the dangerous resonance of storm and impact. The first massive wave struck seconds later. Water exploded upward, crashing over the platform, knocking Silas Kendrew to his knees. Another slammed the concrete again, making the entire structure shudder. Corin raised his voice. "Inside, now! The upper level won't hold!" Merritt spat rainwater, his face pale. "What are you talking about? We're fine. The lighthouse is picking up harmonic pressure from the storm. If you stay up here, you'll be swept off or buried under rubble." Corin's voice cut sharp, decisive. He pointed to the metal hatch Bran had revealed nights earlier. "Either follow me and stay alive or stay here and meet the Pacific the hard way." Gage Lauren didn't hesitate. Survival instinct trumped ego. He grabbed Merritt by the collar and shoved him toward the hatch. Silas scrambled after them, slipping on the soaked concrete. Corin wrenched the hatch open. The metallic groan was almost swallowed by the howl of the wind. Bran leapt down first, landing with practiced ease. Corin motioned the others inside, then descended last, pulling the hatch down just as a third monstrous wave struck the platform, shattering the outer railing into splinters. The heavy naval door sealed behind them, muting the storm to a muffled, throat-deep rumble vibrating through the stone. The air in. The chamber was cold but steady. The machines hummed in low readiness like sleeping predators. Merritt staggered forward, panting, dripping rain. "What is this place?" Corin ignored him and moved directly to the central console. The curved screen flicked to life with a soft pulse of green and blue. Bran sat beside him, alert, tail still, ears trained forward. A signal pulsed on the sonar overlay, small, dense, moving with unnatural precision through the underwater turbulence. Corin's jaw tightened. "They're already here." "Who?" Merritt demanded, clutching the briefcase like a child gripping a toy. Corin zoomed the display. The object was shaped like a mini-sub or advanced underwater drone, maneuvering expertly through the storm's acoustic chaos. "Your buyers," Corin said flatly. "They're using the storm to mask their approach." Silas Kendrew muttered a curse. Gage Lauren's expression hardened into something grim and calculating. Even Merritt's greed flickered into fear. Corin didn't give any of them time to speak. He accessed the encrypted transmission channel Alden had left behind, fingers moving with the decisive precision of someone stepping back into a role he had sworn he'd abandoned. His voice, when he spoke into the mic, was low but steady. "This is Wraithlight Isle, coordinates attached. Severe weather. Unauthorized submersible approaching. Possible compromise of classified surveillance structure. Request immediate naval and Coast Guard response." He hit send. The message vanished into secured frequencies. Corin rested a hand on Bran's back. The dog leaned into him, a silent acknowledgement. He was no longer merely an inheritor, no longer hiding from memories of war. He was standing exactly where Corin Hale had meant him to stand. The anonymous guardian of a fragile coastline. The silent watch. His watch. The first pale glow of dawn filtered through the reinforced glass of the underground chamber, turning the room's metal surfaces into muted sheets of silver. Outside, the storm had passed, but its remnants showed themselves on the sonar display. Fading swirls of chaotic color, like the afterimage of a colossal creature sinking back into the depths. Corin Hale stood before the curved screen, hands braced on the console, his broad shoulders still tense beneath his damp jacket. Bran sat pressed against his leg, ears tilted forward, eyes fixed on the pulsing signals as though reading the ocean's heartbeat. All night, the hostile drone had hovered beyond the reach of the storm, waiting for a break in the chaos. Now, as the sea quieted, its small, dense signature began inching closer. Corin narrowed his gray eyes, the weight of responsibility grounding him. The machine wasn't approaching blindly. It was returning with purpose, certain its chance had come. But before it could reach the island, two new signals streaked across the screen, steady, bright, and unmistakably human. The first carried the rhythmic pulse pattern of a Coast Guard cutter. The second, heavier and more deliberate, belonged to a small Navy patrol vessel. They moved with precision, slicing through the dawn-lit waves like wolves answering a call. The drone hesitated, then turned sharply. Its signature jittered in frantic escape, but the coordinated sweep of the two vessels pinned it into a narrowing corridor. Within minutes, the hostile blip stuttered, flickered, then vanished entirely. Whether it had been disabled, seized, or forced into self-shutdown was unclear, but one thing was certain: it would not be reaching Wraithlight Isle. Behind Corin, Merritt Sloan slumped against the wall, his once smug face drained of color, his damp hair plastered to his forehead. His expensive clothes clung to him like wilted flags. Silas Kendrew sat beside him, his narrow, fox-like eyes darting between the screens with growing panic. Gage Lauren remained stone-faced, though even he shifted uneasily, his scar tightening along his cheek in a line of tension. None of them spoke. The room's quiet authority had stripped them of whatever bravado they had brought to the island. When the storm finally subsided into a soft, distant rumble, Corin activated the ascending mechanism. The heavy granite door above groaned as it slid open, revealing daylight pouring down the shaft like molten gold. He climbed the steps first, Bran immediately behind him, the dog's powerful frame moving with the ease of a creature reclaiming his rightful terrain. The island was battered nearly beyond recognition. The railing that had circled the lighthouse platform lay twisted like broken ribs. Shards of window glass glittered across the concrete. A section of the outer wall had splintered, exposing layers of bare brick and salt-stained steel. The lighthouse tower itself had survived, but only barely. a jagged crack running down its windward side. Still, the island stood its ground, and so did Corin. Below, two vessels hovered close to the rocky base of Wraithlight Isle, their hulls steadying, sailors preparing to deploy. A small group climbed up the wet stone staircase that wrapped around the cliff face. Among them was a man in his late 60s, tall, with a rigid posture that age had not bent. His uniform bore the rank of admiral, the silver stars catching the early sun. His hair, once dark, had turned to a dignified steel gray, trimmed neatly above a sharp, weather-lined face. Admiral Thayer Knox was not the kind of man who wasted movement or breath. His eyes, clear, searching, and hard as frosted glass, took in the destruction before settling on Corin with an intensity that suggested both recognition and relief. "You're Corin Hale," Knox said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I served with your grandfather. Alden was unconventional, brilliant, difficult, but always driven by the right compass." Corin nodded slowly. Bran stepped forward, nostrils flaring as he inspected the admiral with the calm scrutiny of a guardian deciding whether someone belonged. Knox held perfectly still. When Bran finally relaxed, the admiral's stern features softened in what might have been the barest hint of a smile. "We received your encrypted burst," Knox continued. "We've been watching for it for years." Corin swallowed, feeling the weight of the words settle over him. "You knew about the system?" "We knew Alden was building something that defied conventional classification," Knox replied. "But we didn't know its full scale, not until your message, and we didn't know he had trained a successor." Corin glanced at Bran, who simply pressed closer, amber eyes steady. "I didn't think he trained me for anything until the night the storm hit." Knox's expression turned solemn. "Your grandfather built this to protect, not to weaponize. You honored that principle when you sent your warning instead of running." As Merritt and the two hired men were handcuffed behind them, Knox stepped closer. "The Navy would like to offer you a civilian contract," he said. "You and the dog both, if his instincts are anything like Alden described. We need someone who understands what this place was meant to be, someone who remembers that security is not a commodity." Corin exhaled, hearing Alden's silent watch echo through his mind. The sentence carved into that bronze plate, the legacy that wasn't meant to be inherited by blood, but by character. "I'll do it," Corin said quietly. "On one condition." Knox nodded. "The principle remains intact?" "Protect," Corin said. "Never exploit." A slow, approving nod. "Then we're in agreement." Months passed, and the lighthouse was rebuilt, not as a quaint relic, but as a reinforced observation outpost. Walls shaped to break storms instead of surrender to them, steel beams anchored deep into the rock. Storm-proof windows curved around the control deck. A retractable shield protected the underground entrance. On a bright autumn afternoon, Corin stood on the new observation balcony. The ocean spread out before him in endless cobalt waves. The air smelled of pine from the mainland forests and the cold sweetness of the Pacific. A line of thin clouds drifted lazily across the horizon like distant watchmen. Bran leaned against his leg, larger now with renewed muscle, healthier, his thick gray and white coat shining as the wind moved through it. Corin rested a hand on the dog's neck. "We're here, Bran." The dog tilted his head as though agreeing. Corin wasn't wealthy, he never would be, but he had inherited something far rarer than money. A purpose that reached beyond one man's life. A legacy built on vigilance, sacrifice, and the quiet nobility of those who keep danger at bay without expecting applause. A legacy that had been unlocked because one German shepherd scratched the right piece of steel on the right night, answering the call of a man long gone. The watch was his now, and for the first time in years, that truth felt like peace. Some people say miracles are loud, thunder splitting the sky, storms parting the sea. But sometimes miracles arrive quietly, in the shape of a loyal dog scratching at a forgotten piece of steel, or a whisper of courage placed in the heart of a man who thought he had nothing left to give. Corin did not find his purpose through wealth or luck or power. He found it the same way many of us do, through a small moment of grace that changes everything. And if you look closely, those moments still happen every day. A stranger's kindness, a friend's unexpected call, a second chance you never saw coming. Some call it fate, some call it instinct, but many of us know it is the quiet hand of God guiding us when the world feels too heavy, reminding us that none of us stand watch alone. Wherever you are watching from tonight, may this story remind you that your own purpose might be closer than you think, waiting behind a door you haven't opened, or beside a companion who refuses to give up on you. If Corin and Bran's silent watch touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, so others may feel encouraged too. Please like this video, subscribe for more stories of courage and hope, and may God bless you and your family with protection, peace, and the strength to face whatever storms come your way. May His grace guide your steps, just as it guided theirs. Amen.